Right now, you are sitting somewhere warm. Maybe you turned a dial. Maybe you just walked inside. But either way, you didn't have to think about it. The cold is outside, and you are not. Now strip that away. No dial, no inside, no coat you didn't have to earn. Just open land, wind that cuts through you like a blade, and a winter that has been killing things far bigger and tougher than you for thousands of years. That was the situation. Not a bad camping trip, not a rough week, a permanent, unforgiving reality that your ancestors faced every single year with nothing but their hands, their brains, and whatever they could pull from the frozen ground around them. And here is the thing that should stop you cold. We almost didn't make it. There were moments, real moments in the deep past, where the human population dropped so low that we were basically one bad season away from being gone. Not struggling. Gone. The fact that you exist right now means every single one of your ancestors threaded that needle year after year for hundreds of thousands of years. So, how did they actually do it? Because saying they were tough doesn't explain anything. Mammoths were tough. Cave lions were tough. Those things are gone. What did ancient humans have that kept them alive when everything around them was designed to kill them? Let's start with the honest problem. Because people tend to imagine ancient winters as slightly uncomfortable. They were not. Around 26,000 years ago, the planet was locked in the worst of the last ice age. Massive sheets of ice buried Europe and Asia. The land that wasn't frozen was flat, treeless, and wide open to wind that never stopped. Temperatures dropped far below anything most people today have ever stood in, and the human body, designed in warm African savanna, had absolutely no business being there. We have no fur. Our fat layer is a joke compared to the animals around us. We can't slow our hearts and hibernate like a bear. We can't migrate thousands of miles south like the birds. Strip a modern person bare in those conditions, and they're in serious trouble within a couple of hours. Ancient people weren't physically different from us. Same bodies, same limitations. On raw biology alone, we should have been wiped out the first time the temperature dropped. But we had something none of those other animals had. We could look at a problem and build a solution that didn't exist yet. And that changed everything. Fire came first, because nothing else works without it. Humans had been controlling fire for at least 300,000 years by the time the worst of the Ice Age hit. So they weren't beginners. But what archaeologists found in Ukraine surprised even the experts. They expected rough, simple fire pits. What they got were carefully constructed stone hearths, burning at over 600 degrees Celsius. These weren't accidents. These were engineered. And when wood became scarce on the open frozen land, they didn't give up. They burned bone and animal fat instead, which burns long and hot and kept the fire going through nights that could kill you if it went out. But fire only keeps you warm when you're standing next to it. The cold is everywhere else. So they solved that too. The first solution was obvious. Kill something warm and wear it. People were stripping bears of their hides in northern Europe at least 300,000 years ago. We know because the cut marks on the paw bones are exactly where you'd slice to pull a skin off cleanly. Bear hide is thick, windproof, and heavy. Thrown over the shoulders, it was the difference between surviving the night and not. But a loose skin is still a loose skin. It gaps at the wrists, it lets cold air crawl up the back, it doesn't seal. And in a real Ice Age winter, gaps kill you slowly but surely. The fix came around 30,000 years ago, and it's so small it almost sounds like a joke. A bone needle, a thin sliver of ivory or animal bone with a tiny hole drilled through one end. That's it. One researcher called it possibly the single most important invention in human history, and when you think about it, the argument holds up. The needle meant fitted clothing, sealed seams, layers that closed at the wrist and ankle, a coat that traps your own body heat instead of letting it leak out into the wind. The difference between a blanket draped over you and a tailored fur jacket is enormous, and the needle is what made that jump possible. Some researchers believe this clothing advantage was part of why modern humans outlasted Neanderthals when the cold got serious. Better stitching might have been a survival edge. They also figured out something clever before heading out into the cold. Hunters rubbed animal fat called tallow over their exposed skin. Face, neck, hands. It sounds primitive, but it worked exactly the way it was supposed to. The fat sealed the skin, blocked the wind, and held in heat that would otherwise just radiate away. And for the blinding white glare bouncing off snow that could leave you unable to see, Northern hunters carved thin slits into flat pieces of bone and tied them over their eyes. Less light got through, the glare dropped, and they could see. The first sunglasses, carved from bone, thousands of years before anyone thought of a ski resort. Now, everyone pictures ancient people crouched in caves. The reality is more impressive. At a site in Ukraine called Mesorik, archaeologists found houses built almost entirely from mammoth bones. Not caves, houses, constructed buildings, with skulls and leg bones set into the ground as a foundation, ribs and tusks curved upward to form walls, and a roof, and the whole structure packed with hides and moss and earth to hold the warmth in. Hundreds of bones in a single structure. The largest one dates back roughly 18,000 years, right at the coldest point of the Ice Age, and the site shows signs of being used repeatedly over centuries. The design was smart in ways that aren't immediately obvious. Many of these shelters had the entrance dug lower than the sleeping floor. Cold air is heavy and sinks, so it pooled down in the doorway and stayed there while warm air rose up to where the family actually slept. They worked out basic thermodynamics without ever writing a single equation. They also used snow itself as insulation, which sounds backwards until you understand it. Pack thick walls of snow around a shelter, and the inside temperature stays far more stable than the open air outside. Long before the igloo was perfected, people already understood that buried under a snowbank was warmer than exposed to the wind, and wherever there were forests, people built within the trees. A dense stand of trees cuts wind speed dramatically. Standing in a forest during a blizzard and standing in an open field are two completely different experiences, and ancient people knew exactly which one they wanted. Staying warm keeps you alive through the night, but winter's slower killer is starvation. For months, there was almost nothing to find and very little to hunt. So they prepared. When a big hunt succeeded, they didn't just eat until they were full and move on. They worked. Meat got smoked, dried, and stored. Food was packed into underground pits, where the frozen earth kept it cold and preserved. There is even evidence of mammoth meat being weighed down and sunk in cold ponds to keep it fresh. Essentially a natural refrigerator that required no power and couldn't break during a storm. Nothing was wasted. Every calorie from every animal was extracted and used. The hunting itself was organized and deliberate. At a site in eastern France near a tall limestone outcrop, evidence shows that Ice Age hunters used fire and coordinated movement to drive herds of horses and reindeer into a natural trap at the base of the rock. Not once, not occasionally. For tens of thousands of years, the same location, used over and over. Find the big kill, preserve what you can, and live off it through the cold months. That strategy is a huge part of why they survived. But here's the thing most people overlook. These people were never surprised by winter. We get caught off guard by bad storms. We assume the power stays on. They built their entire year around the fact that winter was coming and it was going to try to kill them. Preparation wasn't something they got around to. It was the whole point. And they used each other. Far more people shared a single shelter than any modern person would tolerate, and that was intentional. Body heat is real heat. Pack enough warm bodies into a small insulated space, and the temperature climbs meaningfully. The person with a room to themselves wasn't lucky. They were exposed and cold. The ones who died first in brutal cold snaps were almost always the ones sleeping alone, with nobody close enough to share warmth. Sometimes the cold went so deep that bodies themselves adapted. The Yagan people of the southern tip of South America lived in freezing conditions while wearing almost nothing. Their bodies compensated by running hotter internally, generating more heat from the inside out. They also rested in a deep squat that tucked their limbs in tight and reduced the surface area, losing heat to the air. Their answer wasn't a coat, it was a body that fought back. And then there is the strangest possibility of all. At a site in Spain called the Pit of Bones, scientists studied ancient human ancestors from around 430,000 years ago and found something strange in the bones. The damage occurs in cycles. Growth stops and starts in seasonal patterns. Signs of prolonged sun deprivation? The same kind of interrupted bone development you see in hibernating animals, when a body slows down and begins consuming itself for fuel. Some scientists propose that these early humans, without enough food to survive a brutal winter any other way, may have retreated into caves and entered a kind of deep dormant state to wait out the cold. Not everyone agrees. The debate is still live, but the fact that serious researchers are still arguing about it says something. Your ancestors might have slept through winter like bears. We genuinely cannot rule it out. Here is what I keep coming back to. For hundreds of thousands of years, making it to spring was never guaranteed. Every winter was a test with real consequences for failing. They built houses from the bones of the largest animals that ever walked the land. They stitched fitted clothing from the hides of creatures they killed with sharpened stone. They carved sunglasses from bone and mapped the migration routes of entire herds across frozen continents. In a few thousand years, which is barely a breath on that timeline, we went from stacking mammoth skulls into walls to tapping a thermostat. The thing that nearly erased us is now something we complain about on the walk from a warm building to a warm car. We won so completely that most people forgot there was ever a war.